Compton, California, straight, and she made a point. That was the commissioner. Commissioner Boyden made a point, straight out of Compton, California. That's what I like to see. One of my classmates is here, Brianna. Thank you so much for registering. So as you keep coming in, please register where you're from. Why are you here? What are you hoping to get out of tonight? It's 6:02. I'm gonna jump right in because we've got a lot of conversation for tonight. I am welcomed and happy really to have these panelists who are here with me. And so we first and foremost say welcome to everyone who's joined us for the panel discussion tonight. I know we have close to 100 who are jumping in the room. We had close to upwards of 350 and more who registered, so I'm sure they'll drop in as the night goes on. I can see it still, the numbers are still ticking up. So good for you for showing up on time. Big kudos to you. And so we welcome you. We virtually welcome you to the Empire State located in New York, the NASW chapter of New York State. We're here. Let me let you know up front that this is not a CE event. There won't be any CE credit for tonight's attendance, but please know that while you won't receive CE credit, you will receive a wealth of knowledge. And so again, welcome to all of the 100 of you who are here tonight. Also to let you know that this session will be recorded. And so the purpose and goal of this session is not only to edify and help those who are here with us, but to help those who will watch us on YouTube at some point down the line through the NASW New York State chapter. For those that don't know, my name is Michael Aaron Poindexter. I have the distinct honor of serving as tonight's moderator for this panel discussion entitled The Voice of the Black Male Social Worker. A little bit about me. I am completing my second master's degree, this time in social welfare from my alma mater, the University at Albany. I received my bachelor's in 2009, and I hold the M.Div from the United Theological Seminary, received that in 2014. I serve on the board of directors for the United Way of the Greater Capital Region, the American Heart Association, and the Regional Food Bank of Northeastern New York. I am the proud pastor of the Macedonia Baptist Church of Albany and the father of 4 amazing children who are all under the age of 8. Blessed that I'm able to raise them alongside my beautiful wife of 10 years, Amber. Most of all, and the New York State chapter would want me to tell you that I am an intern in their office. And I will also tell you truthfully that I've gained an invaluable experience during this, my final field assignment, working alongside them. So big kudos to the New York State chapter and Dr. Sam Fletcher. So why the voice of the Black male social worker? When they asked me, some of the projects and focus that I wanted to have this semester for my field assignment, out of everything that I could come up with, I wanted to be able to lift up, amplify, and hear the voice of the Black male social worker, those who have come before me and blazed trails and who have amazing accomplishments. As I've journeyed through my studies to obtain my MSW, there have been several times where I've been the only person of color in the room, and often the only Black male in the room. And to be transparent, this current semester, as I finished this final class, has been no different. And so I felt it was absolutely important to amplify these voices and to provide a little bit of a opportunity to gain some knowledge and experience for all those who want to hear from these tremendous individuals who are here with us tonight on our panel. I'm going to introduce them briefly. Hopefully you've seen our Facebook posts or the Instagram post. Thank you to the National NASW for posting our graphic. I think it got over 1.3 thousand likes, and I know we've been on some national boards. So thank you to everyone who's been sharing and texting and emailing for tonight's panel discussion. The first individual I'm going to introduce is Mr. Greg Lucas. Mr. Lucas is an educator, trainer, and nonprofit leader with over 20 years of school-based youth development experience, currently serving as the Director of Social and Emotional Learning at New Visions for Public Schools. He is an Equity Fellow with the Deeper Learning Equity Fellowship and has served as a consultant for both local and national organizations, including the New York City Administration for Children's Services, New York City Pride, World Vision, Fresh Air Fund, City Relief, and Girl Scouts of America. Greg serves as associate pastor for the New Light Baptist Church in Harlem, USA. He holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Long Island University, a master's degree in social welfare from the University at Albany, and is currently completing a doctorate in education at Antioch University. Welcome, Greg Lucas. How are you doing today, my friend?
What's up, my brother?
It's
good to see you.
Always a pleasure. Straight from Harlem, USA, huh?
Well, yeah, I serve in Harlem, born and raised in Brooklyn. So shout out, I saw some BK love. But I'm currently residing in New Jersey, just over the bridge. But it's good to be here, and my heart goes out for you. That there was something, I think my stomach just kind of twisted a little bit when I heard you say 4 children under the age of 8, I think it was.
Yeah.
And my heart goes out as somebody who's got a 5 and a 10 running around in my own household.
I'm tired. Can't you see I'm tired? I'm tired. I'm happy. I'm excited for my beautiful children, but I'm tired.
We love them.
We love them. We love them.
Drive us crazy, though.
A lot of work. But thanks for joining us tonight, Greg. Thank you.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Secondly, Mr. Barry Walston. Barry Walston is a lifelong activist who prides himself on being his brothers and sisters' keeper. He serves as the president of the Albany Black Child Development Institute, which delivers culturally relevant resources and programmatic supports that respond to the unique strengths and needs of Black children, including early childhood education, health, child welfare, literacy, and family engagement. He is a contract manager in the New York State Department of Health AIDS Institute in the Bureau Division of HIV Prevention, where he pilots several initiatives. He also serves as chair of the New York State Department of Health Affirmative Action Advisory Committee. Prior to joining the New York State Department of Health, Mr. Walston served as the interim director of the Whitney M. Young Methadone Maintenance Treatment Program based in Albany, New York. He supports youth of color within the City School District of Albany, actively mentors several students throughout the Capital Region, is a member of the Albany NAACP chapter, a youth advisor, and has been a certified foster parent since the early 1990s. He would be very upset if I did not also tell you that he is a proud member of the Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. Barry Walston, what's going on, man?
How are you, brother Michael Poindexter and brother Lucas? Thank you. And yes, I am a proud member of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. However, I am the son of a brilliant mother and father who just poured love in me, and from North Carolina. And I just want to shout out to, of course, Black Child Development Institute as the outgoing president, lift up Yamika, but Commissioner Boyden is from California, straight out of Compton, and I appreciate him showing up. He's a BCDI member in California.
Hey, I'm
glad to be here.
Hey, I happy you're here. You brought backup with you, I can see. So I'm sure they're gonna flood the chat. You got some backup, but certainly both of you brilliant in your own right. And Barry, I see the work that you do firsthand every day. So thank you for coming. I also have Mr. Gregory Owens. Gregory Owens is a licensed master social worker who retired from the New York State government after employment after 34 years. During that time, he led statewide initiatives in the areas of fatherhood development, mentoring, and disproportionate representation of children of color in the juvenile justice and child welfare systems within the New York State Office of Children and Family Services. For 2.5 years, he served as the deputy commissioner at the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services, where he led the Office of Youth Development. Owens is certified in healing-centered engagement as of 2021 and has included it in his framework for addressing issues of leadership, racial justice, and equity with the North Carolina Department of Child Welfare, the Wilson County Department of Social Services, and the court system in New Jersey. He has received a bachelor's in sociology from Rider University, a master's in social work specializing in criminal and juvenile justice from the University of Pennsylvania. He is a soloist and member of the male choir at the Macedonia Baptist Church in Albany. where he and his wife of 29 years, Terry Owens, are deacons and active members here. They are the proud parents of Kayla, a graduate of American University, Georgetown University, and one who is seeking her PhD at George Mason. Greg Owens is highly sought after, an amazing, amazing individual. And I am honored to be on the panel with all of them, but specifically Mr. Gregory Owens. He is, if not the coolest deacon and social worker that I know. Mr. Owens, how are you doing today?
Better after your introduction, Pastor. I'm telling you that. I wish I could have recorded that, but this is being recorded, so perhaps I can use it at some point. It's a blessing and honor to be with everyone this evening. I look forward to our conversation. It's just wonderful to be able to have this conversation. And despite the fact that it is an ongoing conversation we've been having for a long time, I am very, very proud of the fact that you have revisited it with us once again so that we can continue to do the work of highlighting the need for more Black male social workers in the field. Thank you so much. I look forward to it.
No, thank you. Thank you all. I'm gonna jump right in because the time is moving quick, but I want to jump right in and start with this stat, which was in fact put on the opening of the Zoom registration. Some of the information that we led with this stat, a 2020 report released by the Council of on Social Work Education and NASW reports that only 11.9% of social work bachelor's degree recipients between 2018 and 2019 were men. Aligned with those rates, stats show that Black students who graduated with bachelor's in social work during 19 and 20, that only 2% were Black men. Clearly, even beyond the stats, we can look around and see a major gap in our everyday lives and the representation of Black men in social work. And we know that this has an enormous detriment in our ability to, one, best serve a variety of critically needed populations, but also speak to the social services system that needs critical work. With all of those factors, you three individuals made it to where you are. So the first question I want to ask you is, how did you end up here in social welfare? What was it about social welfare that encouraged you to pursue this calling or career? And I'll start with you, Mr. Gregory Owens.
Thanks. My family history is that of people who served, right? From watching my great-grandmother in Decatur, Alabama. My grandmother who moved up here to New York State to make sure that she could take care of my father while he was still in Alabama. They moved him up here to go to school. My father, who became, a dentist, but also was head of the Block Association, was also head of the trustee board at the church, was also doing all of the leadership things in the community. And so my brother and sister and I come up in a family where the role models were people who served and offered help and offered assistance, not just to nuclear, but to anybody who needed it. And so often my father would tell some of his patients, you don't have to pay me today. You can pay on an installment plan, which of course was unheard of, but that was his ministry of helps, right? And then I discovered that people tended to gravitate towards me in high school, but mostly in college, to begin to seek input, advice, whatever I could offer if they were in need of let's not call it formal counseling, but some input. And so I found that was something that I enjoyed, something that I wanted to learn more about. And so I kind of looked at the various fields of endeavor and thought that social work might be something that I could land on and offer something to kind of keep my family's ongoing legacy of service alive within our family structure.
Awesome. Thank you. Barry?
So real quickly, thank you. We'll go back and forth with Deacon Owens and Brother Greg because we have this relationship, and of course, Pastor and Brother Lucas. So my degree was in theater and Africana studies. However, it was, of course, my mom who received a Florence Nightingale Award back when I was young as a nurse. I was like, wow, that's really cool. And it stayed with me, right? Because she was in the helping field. However, it was only until I actually got out of undergrad and my first job was a childcare worker, and then I became a probation officer. However, I just had this experience where I'm always trying to help and support people, right? So childcare, probation, and it felt really natural for me to do it. Once I started working, so the professional development is really what kind of moved me into getting into the social work field, formally into the master's program through all the work that I did here in Albany. So that's kind of been my trajectory.
Awesome. Service, common thread. Greg Lucas. Greg.
Well, similar to the other gentleman, I think early on I realized that there was a call to servanthood in whatever endeavors that I was going to pursue. But I think my journey really came from a place of deficit. There were times in my life where I felt unsupported and I didn't feel like I had good direction. I have a great relationship with my father, but he didn't live with me and we didn't grow up together. And I remember particularly in high school that there were a couple of key relationships I had with Black men who really helped to give me a sense of self and a sense of character. And I kept those experiences with me. And when I began to think about what I wanted to do, I said, I want to be able to speak into that void for other people. I want to be able to be that person that some of those men were for me. And I didn't necessarily feel called to the classroom per se, but I knew that there were other young people who were experiencing a deficit of male leadership and representation in their lives. And social work was a space where I hadn't really known what I wanted to do specifically, but I knew I could leverage that degree because of the flexibility I could experience once I graduated. So that's really what kind of led me to social work.
Awesome, thank you. And I would echo that in that I had finished my M.Div in 14 and knew I wanted to pursue my education a little step further. And I happened to meet Greg Owens because he worked for OCFS. And at that time, I was working in education and we were doing the Dads Take Your Children to School Day, the national breakfast. And so, I was told, reach out to OCFS. They've got, the program and they've got some books. And lo and behold, I go to OCFS after making contact with this mysterious Greg Owens. And this gentleman comes out with the big, deep baritone voice and was such an asset, was such a resource and a tremendous blessing to me. And I said, I wonder what he's doing within the OCFS structure. He looks like me, he can resonate, and there's representation in that. And I looked into social welfare and actually enrolled in a program. And so I think representation is absolutely critical. Those people who have come before you, the people who are in your spaces right now, who can speak truth to power, but who look like you, right? Who have come from the background that you've come from, or at least can, what you've experienced resonates with them so that they can speak to where you are. And so all of you, thank you for sharing that. I know that part of the educational journey through, of course, me and my reference point at UAlbany has been a pleasant one, but it's also been an isolating one in that I am not a highly represented demographic in classrooms or in field spaces. And I know how much your educational journey, how critical that is to your development as a social worker, your practice as you get into the field. And so wondering, and Barry, I'll start with you. How did your educational journey shape the social worker that you are today? And as a Black male who's now post-education, or at least post-university in the field, what, if anything, would you have changed through that journey?
Wow. So yeah,
definitely. Oh, and real quick,
yeah.
Y'all don't be alarmed. He's going to change his background at least 3 or 4 more times through the night. So don't be alarmed. This is what he does. Right. He's got some great backgrounds over there. So Barry, go ahead.
Thank you, brother, Pastor. So one of the things that, has shaped me, clearly, I am very confident about who I am because I love my history, and that's what you're seeing. So part of that ability to always be steeped in your history, even though I felt isolated and alienated, I came from North Carolina, I knew that what was poured into me is that I was somebody and that I had something to offer. So when I came up to New York, I carried that, right? And whatever space I was in, I was always able to reach down and get that essence of my Blackness. So that was really key for me. Again, just like you in 2005, when I was going through the program, I was the only Black male. The good thing with me is because I had been doing direct service for such a long time, that my concentration was macro. And I always tell social workers macro is the way to go, because the A in macro is what, Brother Lucas? Is advocacy. I had no problems with advocating for my space, for making sure that whatever we were discussing was brought up. Despite the fact that I was the only male and there were lots of women, I grew up with a whole host of women in my life who were strong women and knew how to negotiate and have that back and forth kind of experience. However, it did not always feel comfortable that all my conversation had to go through women. However, I was able to, the one that was, again, in the program at this time was Dr. Robert Miller, that I did have one person that I could go to and have a conversation. But that experience, yeah, it was very alienating and isolating. However, I think, my church family was another source. So there were things that affinity groups and indigenous organizations that I was attached to outside of the formal program that really grounded me. And so I didn't always feel too alone, but I always challenged all the professors throughout the program. It didn't matter. So that's what I offer.
And I think to that point, there's when you say challenge the professors, I think there's been an evolution of to some extent to what the curriculum looks like and what's taught from when you went to school versus perhaps when I'm navigating through now. And I think that we've made great strides and gains as it relates to having those more difficult conversations within the classroom. But I think your point of challenging professors, I think we show up, especially if you go to a PWI, you show up in PWI, predominantly white institution, you show up and in that space, it is already perceived of the power dynamic and the belief that the professor already, one, has a higher power dynamic, but also comes from a place of where they know it all. And while certainly our professors are guiding lights and teach us and provide us the trainings that we need to be successful in the field, there are lived experiences that we bring to the table that do not resonate with them at times, right? And I think it's important for us as students, but then also once you get back into the field, is to advocate for the difference of what the curriculum should look like so that more effective social workers can come out of programs and be more effective in the field. I got a list of everything that I'm going to talk to Dr. Fletcher about once I graduate, because there are different things that I experienced in the program that I feel, hey, if had it been this way and not that way, it would have made me a better social worker. But I also think it would have made my other counterparts who are not Black, who are not of color, it would have opened their eyes to some of the things that they'll experience when they get into the field. And so beating around that bush, and as you said, speaking truth to power and being that agitator is absolutely critical. Not to digress, but Greg, feel free to jump in. That educational journey, how did it shape you? And if you could go back, is there anything that you would change? I'm gonna have to call on y'all because y'all so polite.
Which Greg?
I'm gonna go with Greg Owens.
Right, I'll jump in. And certainly my educational experience goes back, significantly further than folks on the panel here, because I graduated from University of Pennsylvania in 1978. The interesting thing about the University of Pennsylvania, though, was that it offered an opportunity to take not an opportunity, you had to take 2 semesters of eradicating institutional racism before you graduated, right? It's not optional.
In 1978?
1970, I was there from 76 to 78. it was the first time that I had a theoretical framework to understand what my life experience had been, to be able to put language to it, to be able to touch it and say, this was not me all the time, right? So once you begin to understand that, it becomes an integral part, if you allow it, of how you perceive the rest of the world, including what you want to be as a social worker in your practice and your policy development, et cetera. That was incredibly empowering to me. Now, there were about 5 of us, who made it through in my cohort at University of Penn at that time, right? And of the 5, I think, well, maybe it was 6, and it was split 3 and 3, 3 sisters and 3 brothers. But I have to tell you that what we did was to form this coalition of the 6 of us who would do what Dr. Claude Steele said to do, right? In Whistling Vivaldi years and years later, which is, if you feel stereotype threat in a situation, like you're not there because you belong there, like you don't feel connected to anything because you don't see yourself represented, form a group of people who are like-minded, socialize, recreate, study together, and then the stereotype threat is diminished. Again, didn't have the language for it, but it just made sense to go through this rather strange experience where you're not really represented the way you may be from where you come from. I come from Mount Vernon High School, which was 70% Black when I graduated, right? But then I went to Rider University where that experience did not exist, and I struggled. So to understand that better at the University of Pennsylvania, I now had this thing called institutional racism that explained a lot of what was happening throughout my life. And I had a cohort of people, like-minded people that I could talk to. So that, in addition to joining the National Association of Black Social Workers in 1978, 1979, which further gave me a rooted experience in the fact that there were people all over the country and beyond who engaged in this struggle to liberate people, from the structural racism that exists and existed. So that's what my educational experience was really kind of interesting from that perspective.
That's really interesting. And Greg Lucas, let me get to you in 2 seconds. I think, you mentioned institutional racism, and of course we know we live in a space where prejudice is all around. There are microaggressions, stereotype threats, coded language, dog whistles. How are you able, and Greg Lucas, I'll go right to you. How are you able to show up in those spaces as your authentic self? Actually, let me give context. Are you able to show up in those spaces as your authentic self? And if you're able to do that, what advice would you give to others on this Zoom who are struggling with that?
Well, one, I just want to say that I didn't know what authentic self meant. I went to school 20 years ago, right? And much to Barry's point, I went to University of Albany, and the majority of my classmates were white women. And I remember there was one brother in my class, my one other colleague who was a Black man, and we remember vividly when they would go around and talk about, why do you want to do this work? And I would hear this consistent theme of, well, my husband is in finance, or my husband is a lawyer, my husband is and I'm tired of being home. So I want to get a degree and do something else with my time. And I couldn't help but think, where are these folks going when they leave here? When they get this degree and they go, where are they going? Where are they going to work in foster care? Are they going to work in child welfare? Are they going to work in the education system? Where are folks going? And back then, there was no emphasis on racial, cultural, socio-political context. And without racial, social, political context, social welfare can be a form of violence, particularly against people of color.
Yeah.
You go into a hospital to work as a social worker, but you have no context to the access of healthcare for Black and brown people. You go into a high school or middle school to work in education as a social worker, but you have no context about the school to prison pipeline, where people are suspending young people of color at higher rates than their white counterparts. Right. Yeah. You go to do community-based social work, and you have no idea how redlining affected where our people of color live, and why these places of poverty exist, right? That they're so centralized. And so, you know, you work as in criminal justice, and you have no idea about the Rockefeller drug laws and what that did to the Black family, right?
Yeah.
And so when you go into these spaces, it's easy when you go into these spaces without context, it's easy to look at people of color from a deficit lens, right? And so a social worker on, you know, one of the things that used to be popular back in the day was this like symbolism of a social worker being a superhero. Social workers are not superheroes. Right. Social workers are not supposed to be superheroes because social workers are not supposed to save anybody. And if you go into this field thinking that your job is to put on a cape and save people, then you are operating from a place of violence. And so there's often a deficit narrative that you're bringing into this space that you need to interrogate. You don't fix Black families, you don't repair Black families, right? And so oftentimes social workers are relegated to this idea of fixing families. Right. And that's a very dangerous thing. And so for me, right, this idea of showing up as your authentic self is being able to recognize that I can occupy I can occupy a space as fully myself. When I got to college, I didn't realize I was poor until I got to college. Everybody had the same thing when I lived in Brooklyn. But when I got to college and I saw that other people lived vastly different lives, had access to vastly different resources, I was like, oh, I'm poor. I didn't realize I was poor. I just thought this is how everybody lived. But I saw the disparity across. And then I also saw how these spaces weren't necessarily set up for me. I also saw how my identity shrunk in predominantly white spaces. I'm gonna be honest with you, my freshman year in college, my freshman year in undergrad, you know, freshmen, they're the worst at picking schedules for school. So I had an 8 a.m. class. And I would have to run across campus to get to my 8 a.m. class. And I remember vividly that if I got to class at 8:05, at 8:06, I wouldn't go. Because the thought of walking into that class late in a lecture hall full of white students, I immediately stereotype threat took over. And I would say, I'm not walking into that class because everybody's going to think, here's the Black kid walking in late to school. Here's the Black kid who's lazy. Here's a Black kid who doesn't deserve to be here. And I wouldn't go, right? And I still see that pattern playing out in young people and even adults as we enter into spaces. So again, part of the ability to walk, to own your space and to own your identity is to gain a deeper understanding of the racial, cultural, and socio-political context in which in the spaces that we occupy.
That's great. Barry, I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot to unpack. So I think also regionally, like, so I'm from the South, and I'm just thinking about when I was in that space, and I keep showing my heroes and sheroes in back of me, that again, I was rooted in that. But however, in that space, when you talk about my authentic self, I wanted to share with you part of my upbringing was I was Seventh-day Adventist. I went to Catholic schools. I went to a Lutheran school. So the thought of diversity was always part of me. Like I grew up in those spaces. I was the only one in that space. And so that kind of managed what my authentic self would be, right? I wasn't aware of all these microaggressions because it never directly hit me. I felt empowered in those spaces when we were able to navigate whatever it was that I was doing within, especially at SUNY. And I think the other thing was about leadership. And so, you know, to Brother Lucas's point, when he went through that space, there were like I can tell you the 2 Black professors that were part of the faculty, right? So they were isolated, they were alienated, they were the only. And when you talk about kind of creating a community, what did that look like? It was those extended families, those other indigenous organizations that helped support that. And I see Dawn Knight Thomas is on. It was the Black Child Development Institute back then, 20 years ago, that kind of fostered those relationships, built those community relationships that had helped you go through that process. So you were shielded in a lot of ways. At least that was my experience in going through SUNY Albany's MSW program.
Well, when you talk about that authentic self, and, you know, from what Barry, you've said, Greg, you said, you know, it was primarily white women who were, for the most part, dominating the space within these classrooms, and nothing has changed. You know, 2020, 22, 23, it's the same thing. Navigating that as a student is one thing, right? How do you navigate that when you graduate and you're in the field? And those same, Greg, as you said, those same women or those same individuals who were in the classroom who had no clue, no concept of redlining, no clue, no concept of racism and prejudice and microaggressions. And now they're your counterparts at your agency. They're your counterparts who now they're not working with you on an assignment. They're making policy that impacts lives, right? Which is different. And so how do you navigate the workplace environment as a Black male, showing up as your authentic self, where your counterparts are not necessarily of the same understanding of what the goal and the mission of being a social worker is all about? Greg Owens, I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I certainly appreciate the comments from Greg and Barry earlier. That was spiritual. And so that's a good segue into what I think you need to do to be your authentic self and navigate your workplace spaces with this new understanding, right? So you have to take your leadership self into these places, which means you've got to be courageous, and you've got to close the gap between not knowing and knowing. Because if not, we perpetuate the same patriarchy, the same white supremacy in the organizations as the people we're working with, because we don't know better. All right, so many, many years we spent advocating for evidence-based programs, not realizing that those programs don't necessarily mesh with our community for lots of different reasons. They weren't developed for our community, they were developed in other places. And so, but what we tended to do was advocate for them because other people that we may have respected were saying this is what we have to do in the agency. And so the thing for me is to, once you know, you can't unknow. So what are you going to do? And so then you've got to stand up in meetings and be prepared for the heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching, heart-pounding conversation that says, no, I don't support that. No, I can't do that. And then be prepared for the consequences. And we often are not prepared for or don't want to take the consequences. And so when we began to do racial disparity work at OCFS, and we began to close the gap between not knowing and knowing, then you got to draw a line in the sand about what you're going to advocate for. Your language should change. Your posture should change. You should be promoting things that may be antithetical to the very organizational values that you come into work every day and thought you understood. Data's got to help with that. We can't become overwhelmed with data, but data does tell part of the story. And we've got to be really, really competent in the narrative that we establish about who we are and what we know about what we know. Because for many, many years, that was hidden from us.
Yeah.
And so I'm coming up with a degree in sociology and didn't know a Black sociologist throughout my entire training and learning, right? And it wasn't until I hit graduate school that I even had the language to understand this is institutional racism and what that looks like. So when I go to a congregate care setting and I say to them, no, when it comes around that time, in October when we celebrate, this strange holiday that's supposed to be about this guy who came across the ocean and discovered this, you know what I'm saying? Right? When you say to the administration, no, I don't want to do it that way, you have to be prepared for the response. Right. And the response generally has been, well, you're not a real team player. And so what do you do with that? And you have to walk through that space with your spirit intact, with your sense of self intact, with your identity intact, and with your peer group to help you walk through that, because if not, it will destroy or you perpetuate the very thing that you're trying to undo.
I think that's so powerful. And, listening to the way you've presented that provides a different vantage point and another lens to look at it through it. And let me just say, for all those who are on the Zoom tonight, feel free to throw some questions in the chat. I'm going to do my best to get to all of them. And I know I've already seen some hands raised. So I'm gonna come down your well, in church was I'm gonna come down your aisle 2 seconds, I promise. But you know, it's exhausting. And I just, you know, to keep it 100% real, going in these spaces, whether it's in school or whether it's at work, and you have now become the de facto expert on everything Black or everything of color, or something happens in Buffalo and now everyone wants your thoughts, your statement, you know, it's exhausting. It is exhausting. So, you know, I think your piece on Greg Owens, on your peer group, and having that support system, having that network of people that you can talk to, who will help you navigate through some of these barriers and obstacles that we face is absolutely critical, because you can't make it on your own. I know for a fact, and even in my work as a full-time executive, it can be exhausting. And there have been moments and times where I have to call others who I know have gone through that journey and walked in those same blaze that trail that I'm walking through, to get and glean that information from them. So the struggle is real, right? And I think that it's important for everyone on the Zoom to understand what happens when these instances occur. What happens when the person of color is already automatically made as the expert in the room, when they may not necessarily have the energy or the expertise or the desire to be that, but are pushed and propelled in that space because y'all feel that it's okay for them to be there. It's exhausting. And so keep that in the back of your mind as you navigate forward. I'm going to get to a question in the chat, but one of the things I want to ask you is the struggles. And we're going to get to the successes, because this is not going to become just struggle. This is going to become success, because part of the amplification of your voice is that all of you have had tremendous success as social workers, right? There have been some struggles, there have been some hiccups, but you've been successful. And I think often the narrative is that either there's a lack of success or that it's always this space of tragedy or trouble, but understanding that you've been able to still be successful in spite of all that. And so I just want everyone on the Zoom to know that we're going to get to the successes. You're going to hear the accomplishments and achievements of these brothers, because they've done remarkable work. When you look at the gap, right? Going through school, I can count on one hand the amount of Black teachers that I interfaced with from pre-K to 12. And I know I never saw a Black social worker in my school. Didn't really recall Black social workers in and around the community. And so with such a dearth, and poor word, but of Black males in the field, give me some of the reasons that we've led to this. You know, how have we got to this place, and what are we not doing? Because Barry Walston said when he went to school, it was the same way of what I'm experiencing today. So what are we not figuring out, and what do we need to change so that we can increase the amount of representation in this field? Barry, I'll start with you.
Okay, great. So it's not either or, it's and what we need to do. In the back of me, again, and I'm steeped in my history, you see the struggle, but you see the brilliance and the vibrancy of where they're going and what they're doing, right? That's what propels me to do this work. I think it's so important to understand your historical underpinnings, right? So we use a model called social cultural model. And so if you don't know the historical underpinnings, you don't know the cultural norms, you don't know those external factors, it will impact systems, right? And I think even with, I work at the Department of Health, I was the only Black male on the 3rd floor for like 15 years. Just all my conversation and narrative had to go through white women, which is 55% of our workforce at the Department of Health. Some of the barriers, and I would parallel, is that the feminization of social services. That's a huge barrier. How they perceive Black males. And even in our conversation, it's hard for us just to talk about Black males unapologetically. We always have to include. And so it's about being conscious, like, I don't need to apologize just to have a Black male-centered experience. I control the narrative, we control the narrative, and we have to, I would say, amplify that and lift that up. There was, again, all those stereotypes about Black men being, in my experience, when I was the only person, I was aggressive. I wasn't aggressive. The A in macro is advocacy. I was very assertive about how I was approaching things, right? However, because I was a Black male and all those external factors impacted the description that they had, right? So those are barriers for the systems, those stereotypes, those biases, and it's the politics around the hypersensitive around incarceration, that Black males are all incarcerated. And so we get all of these labels attached and dumped on us. And so when we're coming in there, and I come in that authentic, in my place as authentic Barry with a bow tie, and Dawn sees me as another Black male, but not having the conversation. I'm picking on Dawn because I see you, Sister Dawn, but not giving me the space and the opportunity to share what my narrative is. So one, you have to control the narrative. I think, just to say all of that. And the other thing is that within social services, Black males are typically ignored. I've gone to spaces where within the school setting, I have a godchild who's special needs, and they literally had a CSE, Committee of Special Ed meeting. And as a social worker, I'm interacting with social workers. They would not look at me. They did not look at me. And this was 5 years ago. This wasn't like 10 years ago. Here in the school district, did not look at me because they couldn't. Why are you here? What is it that you could offer? And again, you have to go in there knowing, as Brother Greg Owens said, knowing and not forgetting what you know, and then just advocating and being assertive about that information to start changing, the trajectory.
Thank you. Greg Lucas, what do we do?
Brother Barry said a whole lot there. He dropped a lot of knowledge.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be repetitive. I think this idea of the dehumanization of the Black man is something that can't be overstated, right? This idea that Black men are not allowed to have a full range of emotions. Black men, they're not allowed to have authority over feelings. And we experience that in a day-to-day, and then we perpetuate that when we're raising our own kids, where we don't allow them to have a fully human experience. And so this idea that Black men can be empathetic, that Black men can be filled with compassion, these are often things that are taken from us when we describe Black men. And those are often attributes that we say are really important for social workers, right? But those are also simultaneously the messages that we're sending, that Black men are incapable of holding those emotional values and characteristics and those traits. So I think we need to be better at recognizing the dehumanization of Black men, the how we steal their ability to be fully human, how young people aren't allowed to be angry. If they're angry, that means that they're violent, right? But they're not allowed to be angry. They're not allowed to experience emotion in the way that other people are done. And so we're constantly policing Black young people. I went to, I moved out of the city and I moved to New Jersey, and I put my son in school in New Jersey. And I remember I met the guidance counselor. My guidance counselor was going to meet at the time, I think he was in second grade. He was going to meet my son for the first time. And they're like, well, we're going to call your son down to the main office, to the counselor's office, and we're going to meet him for the first time. I said, great. And they're like, we're just going to call his name over the loudspeaker and he's going to make his way down. I said, excuse me? I was like, he's 7 years old. They're like, yeah, we'll call his name over the loudspeaker. He'll hear it. He'll come down. And if he doesn't know, somebody will direct him. And I was blown away. I said, so you're going to let him walk by himself? No one is going to police his small body all the way to the office. In New York, there's lines on the floor, right? And there's you have to look one way, and you have to have zero silence. And there is an over policing of Black bodies in school. And so this idea that my son can get up and walk and have agency over his body was so incredibly foreign to me, right? And so it's a reminder of how stifling and oppressive that the conditions are that we often create for young people, and they grow up in that space of constantly being policed. Right. And so those are not people who grow up and think, I want to be expressive. I want to have agency over my body, over my thoughts and my emotions, and be able to connect and help other people. So I think it's important for us, again, this idea of context and how are we creating space for young people to feel empowered to be in a position where they can operate in spaces where they can leverage their compassion and their empathy.
Wow, powerful. I thank you for sharing that. I got to get to the chat because time is approaching, but I see Mr. Dwight Williams has his hand up. I should say Professor Dwight Williams has his hand up, MSW graduate 1972. So I'm going to let him jump in with a question or a statement. Mr. Williams?
Thank you. Just a statement. I'm not Don. I have my muscles on like his. So, but I graduated from Delaware State HBCU, and then went to graduate school at Rutgers. And it was on the cusp of 1960, 1970, the transition. And the first day of class, the syllabi were handed out. And I was looking at my syllabus, and I just kept staring at it. So the professor said, well, what's wrong? I said, you don't have any Black authors here. You know, you don't have W.E.B. Du Bois. You don't have Dr. Billingsley or Whitney M. Young. What's the story here? She kind of looked at me cross-eyed and said, I'll tell you what, you fix your own syllabus. So I did it for the next semester. But we had a core group of about 5 or 6 of us. We went through the program. My first job was at the New York City Family Court. It was horrific. Kids would come in. I was the only Black on the faculty, on the staff. Kids would come in, and their case would be adjudicated in about 2 days. And most of the time, they were sent upstate, was Kingston and the rehabilitation facilities thereabouts. But one thing I want to share with the folks is that when you're in these positions, you're going to be by yourself. Most of the time, you can be the only one there. I came with a focus on policy and program development because I understood that policy defines the programs to get the funding. And for the bulk of my career, since coming to the School of Public Health, I was the only only Black person at the school. And it's stressful, but you find delight in many ways. One, faith takes you through tough, difficult time, plus the students. And I spent a significant amount of my time mentoring students. But there were times when you're at meetings and you were just one promoting issues of relevance. And the last point, you hear a lot about health disparities now, eliminating health disparities. Years ago, when we did policy and planning, we talked about reducing. And if you look at any graph, you see lines, comparable lines, and you see things they do reduce. But the thing of the problem is that that gap's still there. And it wasn't until President Clinton was in office and it was his report on the initiative on race. And a simple thing, a verb change, the power of verbs, the power of words in general. And the reason I stand at the policy perspective is that we change it from reducing to eliminating. What a big, big leap. Millions of dollars toward eliminating health disparities. And that's where we're standing now. But the final point is that it's lonely there. You need a core group. You need your team. You need your huddle, because you'll be ostracized and those kinds of things. But you need to go in knowing that you have some folk who will support you, because times will get rough. There's no question about that. Thanks for the moments. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Williams. Always a pleasure. What I'd like to do is shift that, there's a lot of success that is on this panel tonight. When I look at these three individuals, and I could read you their entire bio and you'd be blown away. But what I'd like each of you to do is really to speak to the highlights of your successes that were directly attributed to being a Black male in the field of social welfare. I'll even state, and I said it earlier, that, and hopefully Mr. Greg Owens will say one of his big successes was that I followed him into the field of social welfare, right? That if it wasn't on your list, hopefully you'll add it to your list. But give me some of those successes. What tangible successes have you seen happen because of the position that you were in and the demographic that you represented? I'm gonna start with Greg Lucas.
Oh, wow. He's going to start with me. Well, okay, good. That feels good, because then I don't have to listen to these brothers and then feel so incredibly insignificant. So I appreciate the grace that you extended me. I think one of the things that I'm most grateful for is this journey has allowed me to be in rooms and in positions of influence and positions to make changes that I never thought that I was going to be able to do. I think even in my current role, working for a network that manages high schools all across New York City, I myself have rewritten many of the policies relating to fair hearings, suspensions, and student discipline, to make them more equitable, to make sure that students had rights. And we've been able to significantly shift patterns of suspensions and punitive measures because of some of those changes. And I'd like to think that because of some of those changes, many folks' trajectory in terms of those young people have shifted considerably. So I'm deeply grateful for the opportunities to be able to make change on a policy level for schools, and being able to speak to rooms full of principals. And I had an opportunity to address an organization at the national level, hosting retreats for executives of other nonprofits that are doing this work. And so, I will always be deeply grateful and appreciative of how this work has given me access to use a platform. And what I will say for the folks that are here, and I know that you want us to stay bright and future focus and talk about the highlights. What I will say quickly is that what I've noticed in my time in this field is that folks will pimp your culture. They will use you as a culture pimp. They will use your Black experience cannot be for sale. People will put you in places to engage other folks, to use your cultural fluency to make connections with young people. But then why is that never elevated to the point of leadership? Why are so many Black folk kind of like, if you're not on the front lines, you're kind of like hovering somewhere in middle management? So folks will pimp your cultural experience, right, to be effective, but then you're never in the room for the fundraising, you're never in the room for executive directorship, right? And so at some point, you need to make a decision that my Black experience is not for sale, right? And so for some of us, the work is going to be pushing to make sure that we end up in the executive office. And so some of us need to continue to push. Other of us need to say, thank you for your time and leave and start your own thing. right? One of my deep joys is, other than the work that I'm doing, now I'm doing independent consulting. And that's really where I have autonomy, right? Because so that little check that organization cuts you, even though the state and the federal funding that they're getting for that work is 5 times that amount, and then they're giving you just a pittance, but then all the work that you do goes into the grant writing to say, look at this amazing work that we've done. Don't let these folks pimp you out. If you continue to push to a place of leadership, or you leave, and don't be afraid to start your own thing. And so Brother Owens was talking about this idea of being courageous. And sometimes that means that you got to choose a different path. Don't sit around here waiting for them to give you a step up or a promotion. Sometimes you have to recognize that your talents are not to be wasted, and they're not for sale, and you need to find another path. And then also, real quick, I'll say, because I know that we're at time.
Hey man, take your time. You dropping knowledge tonight. Go ahead.
You cannot take for granted how much voices and wisdom in the Black community are constantly stifled. They are not a part of social work practice. And there are so many amazing Black and Indigenous organizations, grassroots movements, community activists that know this work, that should be incorporated into what we're learning. But academia is so colonized that there's a stopgate, right? And so because they're not something that you can research in your libraries, that somehow that they're not worthy to be a part of your learning experience. And so we want to continue to bring in those voices. There are people that have been doing some of the work that you're doing. They're doing it for years. They can work rings around the work that you're doing. And they've been doing it at the community level, and we never elevate those voices. We never bring them into that sphere because there's such a colonized view of academia. And so some of that has to come down. I don't want to start no trouble, but I thought I heard at the beginning of this that there's no CE credits given to this. I'm curious to know what is being provided CE credits. And I'm sorry to start trouble, but I'm just asking the question, right? Because I see a lot of people are invested and see this as a vital part of their learning. So my curiosity is a little bit piqued in terms of, why isn't this something that's valuable? So I'm saying, again, don't let folks pimp your Black experience. Your culture is not for sale.
Wow, that's, man. Barry Walston.
All I'm going to say is, look, I'll put up Huey P. Newton, okay? Lucas, don't try. He was also a member of Phi Beta Sigma. I know Dr. Donna Clears is looking at me, but outside of that, I just wanted to put that up for
I see how you just threw that in, man. That was good. That was smooth.
I wanted to share that, but I also, wow, yeah, that was a question to me. And I think, Brother Pastor Poindexter, the intern, is going to figure that out, Brother Lucas, what this experience should look like. And so what you just did was really practice as a macro student, right? You are advocating.
I am macro.
But the micro, understand that when you talk about what we need to do differently with this experience, and there was a white woman who said, I'm a white supervisor and I supervise Black males. So part of the thing is knowing the history, right? Understanding those cultural relevant experiences, that it should not be something that I need to share with you. Creating a space that looks equitable, right? Now we've couched it under DEI, however that works for you, but understand that when Black males come into these spaces, that your responsibility as a supervisor is to make sure that you are embracing the whole person, right? We talk about PIE, right? Person in the environment. So as a practitioner, we need to think about that, right? How are we practicing that?
Right.
I see Dr. Lee Johnson on here in the back of me. What made me is, I see my sister Darlene Walker. I'm going to lift up Black Child Development Institute, one, because we unapologetically talk about the lived experience of Black melanated babies. And so when you're doing the work that you're doing, any system, Frederick Douglass says, it's easier to build children than to repair broken men. And so we got to start young. I don't care where you are in a system. My goal is to make sure that we're creating and planting a seed that is healthy and strong, right? So I don't want to invite a consultant and they see Big Barry because we didn't do the work ahead of time, right? And so our organization, when you speak to things that were given me and things that can help change the trajectory, in the back of me is the Black Child Development Institute of Albany. And again, you know, these indigenous organizations have helped shape who I am today. I'm part of the NAACP as NAACP Youth Counselor as an advisor. And I'm also part of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. I bring that up because when we talk about the Black male trajectory, we have indigenous organizations, 100 Black men. We have the D9, the Boule. We need to do better about integrating them into this work that we do, right? I'm not sure who's beep. There's a beep or a gong.
Oh, I thought that was your Big Ben. I was like,
no, that's not
Big
me.
Ben in the background. Like
that's not me. However, I think, you know, again, what built me, Brother Michael, is that all these indigenous organizations that I've been are a part of has really been the foundation. These are things that I take into all these spaces, at work, at church, in an informal conversation. That's my authentic self. The other thing is that when we talk about, and we didn't talk about the gender disparities, right? And so I've had conversations, I work for the Office of LGBTQ. When we work with specific organizations or do specific work, why aren't we understanding that we're not talking about James Baldwin? What? You're not talking about Langston Hughes? Why? Right? So it is incumbent upon me in that space to lift up those same gender-loving men who contributed to my experience, to my Black experience here in America. And I think for any social worker, for Black male social workers, we need to be intentional about the relationship. So to Brother Lucas's point, you have to contextualize it, because it's okay to just kind of be willy-nilly. It's not okay. It really, you need to be intentional about what that means to you. I think we have to, if we know that it's very exhausting, that if we don't want to get too overwhelmed, then if we're being critical, thinking about what it is that we want to offer that space, then we have to be intentional.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. I'm gonna turn it to Mr. Greg Owens, a Titan in his own right. And if you could share those success stories, right? Those, and I know even today you're still doing post-retirement the same amount, if not more, impactful work than you did while you were working full time. So could you just share those success stories and how what you've done has made an impact on the spaces that you influence?
Yeah, thank you. And I know we're kind of running short on time, so I won't be long. And you know, as a Baptist preacher, you know that what that really means, right?
He must be talking about Greg.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. So the first success is that you know you did follow me into this space, right, of pursuing social welfare. And so I think that while you know that you could almost say that's tongue in cheek, but the reality is you and I both know that that's what mentoring is about, right? That's what showing up as who you are is all about, because it could have been very different, right? I could have been a different kind of brother and you could have been a different kind of brother. But because we are who we are in terms of identity, all that means, we connected at a level that let both you and I know we were going to end up doing work together one way or another, and you went down the path of pursuing your degree. So showing up is important. Showing up is also part of healing. And so I think if I have had some measure of success It's to let people know that I will show up on behalf of Black people, whether I'm working for the state of New York or I'm walking in some other path.
Right.
That when I talk about this, I'm showing up for Black people unapologetically, not to the exclusion of anybody, but also making sure that people understand that because of what I know, this is a priority that I'm going to talk about.
Right.
I think the other thing is, I think I've been able to get some people to understand that we too need to heal, right? Black men in social work have been harmed by our educational experience. We've been harmed by what we've been taught in our institutions. We've been harmed by the policy that we've had to implement when we go into these organizations and these spaces where the policy, whether it's agency policy or public policy, has harmed our people and therefore harmed us. So if we don't begin to heal, we're going to have a real problem trying to provide other people an opportunity to go through a healing process. And so I think it's critically important to take a look at what Greg Lucas said about this notion of agency, because that's part of healing. Without agency, you can't move to the next level. I think one of the things that I've been able to help people understand is that this is real. You know, what we've been experiencing is not an abnormality that we are at fault for. That it is part of a very intentional and historical approach to making sure that people are controlled in certain fashions. And so in order to fight against that, you really have to begin to understand that this thing is A, real, B, it's intentional, it has its roots in history, and so now what are we going to do to unravel and undo it? I think I've been able to get people to understand that differently now because of the work that I've been able to do. And I think that, again, this notion, and Barry and I have been involved in this, when you mentor young people, particularly young brothers, like we did with our Rites of Passage program, once you know, you can't unknow. And so we have young people now who in their educational process were never taught some of the things that Barry and I shared with them about who we are, about the diaspora, about what Africa really is and means. They will never be able to be told something different that they have to believe. They now have a choice.
Right.
So I think if there's been any other modicum of success, it's to give people an opportunity to have some choice about what they've accepted all their lives. I remember being in Westchester real quickly and presenting the data and talking about race-based disparities in child welfare, particularly in congregate care. And a white manager coming up to me weeping saying, I didn't realize I was doing this all my life, professional life. I say, okay, now you know, what are you gonna do differently? Because you can't unknow anymore. And so I think if I've had any success, it's being able to kind of peel back Pandora's box and say, you know what, it's real. We've all seen it all of our lives. There's something that we can attach to it that has a framework to it. Let's move forward and we can do something different about it. But I do think, and I want to close on this, Black men in this profession, and I would dare say almost any profession, but let's stick with social work, we got to heal from the harm that's been done to us.
Can I ask a question? Because someone actually, a Black man in the chat asks specifically that, how do you heal? What are some of those things that you should do in order to begin that healing process? And I know I heard you and Greg both speak to agency, but what are some other things that Black males can do? And I wasn't a Black male, it was Miriam asked, to heal. Like, what does that look like?
So let me lift up what Dr. Sean Ginwright has offered from Flourish Agenda in terms of healing-centered engagement, right? We have to change from looking out at the lens, which is what we're taught to do, start with the other, that's a social work tenet, to getting up in the morning and saying, who do I need to be? And going to the mirror first, right? Don't go to our to-do list, go to the mirror. Who do I need to be in order to get this done today? We need to move from focusing on solving problems, which is what we're trained to do and rewarded to do, to looking at the possibilities that are available beyond the problems, because problems get you into budget, they get you into shrinking resources, they get you into all kinds of strange things, but possibilities can be endless. We need to move from the transactional relationships of I'll do this for you if you do this for me. I'll give you this if you give me this back. You can go on the home visit if you behave on campus, right? Into transformational thinking and relationships. You don't have to give me anything for me to do this because it's the right and righteous thing to do, right? And finally, Dr. Ginwright says, and I subscribe to it, and we all know it, we are addicted to being busy because we're rewarded for looking busy, even if we ain't busy.
Right.
And so he says we got to go into the flow of things, which is ancient. We have flown through the various problems, circumstances, situations, and still achieved, survived, and in many cases overcame. And so I think that's one framework. How do you do that? Those levers have to touch culture. They have to touch agency. They have to touch relationships. They have to touch on meaning and purpose, which takes us back to social work. And they have to go back to the notion of dreaming, which is aspirations. That's Dr. Ginwright's work. That's how I'm living now in the healing frame, because I too need to continue my process of healing as I continue to do my work.
And I think the important is remembering, and thank you for that, remembering that it's a process.
It is a process, never ends.
It's never ending. It's continuous. And for those out there who think, hey, you know, we said sorry today and then tomorrow's a new day, there's still healing that has to come out of that, right? And that every day there's something that can come to bring us trauma that we need to heal from. And so spaces need to understand that. I know Amelia keeps saying,
yes, you gotta go.
No, Amelia said we could stay here all night, but no. I told y'all I got 4 kids. So what I am going to do though is I'm going to ask you all one final question, is one final word of advice that you can give to the social workers who are on, or the folks who are here that are not social workers. What's one final piece of advice you can give them for encouragement in order to be the change agents that they need to be in their spaces? I'll start with Greg Lucas. Greg, you knew I was coming to you, Greg.
Well, one, I just want to say thank you for creating the space. I think we don't have these spaces enough. It was a blessing, and it was replenishing for me to hear Brother Barry and Brother Owens speak from a place of wisdom and experience. And so I'm deeply grateful for this time together. I don't take that lightly. You know, one thing I will say really quickly, and this goes back to what Brother Owens was saying when he so magnificently was citing kind of like the healing centered work that Dr. Ginwright has been leading many of us into, is this idea of taking care of ourselves, right? And pulling from Audre Lorde when we think about self-care as a form of resistance, right? That self-care is not a sense of indulgence. And I know that for many of us historically, like those are not those are not the things that we remember, right? Many of us were raised in a patriarch or a matriarch that didn't really invest because maybe they didn't have the time, or they didn't have the resources, the capabilities to do that. But I think our self-care is so vitally important because it's how we remain in the struggle. And I remember Lama Rod Owens once said, if we don't do our work, then we become work for someone else. Right. And you don't want to become someone else's work. So taking care of yourself is so incredibly important. And the one last thing I will say, and I think that these brothers, Barry and Deacon Owens, are kind of like are the representation of this, is don't be afraid to chart your own course. You've heard them and the work that they're doing. They're doing things that there was no model for before them. They trailblazed in many ways. And I'm sure that there were paths that they could have taken that were very safe, right? And could have led them down, you know, a nice path. But in many ways, they saw spaces that weren't being occupied, and they trailblazed, and they weren't afraid to make their own individual mark. And so, you know, and I'm not to say that you can't work in one particular organization and setting and advance in that space. That's fine if that's your calling. But for many of us, if we search ourselves, there may be a charge for you to do something that the space for it doesn't even exist yet. And so for you, what does that mean to move into spaces that don't even exist yet, to create that space, right? Some of you are doing work and you're thinking, man, if only this work could happen this way, if only we can do things this way. And what's maybe happening is that you are receiving messages that you are meant to do things exactly the way that your spirit is telling you to do. And that might mean that you might need to trailblaze and create your own path so that others can begin to follow you. So I'm deeply humbled to be in community with these brothers because they represent that trailblazing spirit, and they've pushed into spaces that didn't exist before them. And so I would encourage you, as you think about the spaces that you want to occupy in social work as you move forward, if it's maybe not a space that exists, but that you have to create for yourself.
That's good. That's good. Barry Walston?
Wow. So look, Brother Lucas, I put up unbossed Shirley Chisholm. I'm just letting you know that I'm putting up images that you lifted up Audre Lorde. So that's great. So I want to say for the Black males that are here in this space, and Pastor knows, Pastor always say, I love you, right? One, we normalize that. Thank you, Brother Greg, Brother Gregory Owens. I love you both. That should be a practice, right? It's okay to say I love you, Black men. The other thing I would say that for those who are working in this field and those who are in school, that if Brother Poindexter did not talk to me about Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu, if he did not lift up Dr. Lerone Bennett Jr., if he did not talk about Dr. Naeem Akbar, if he did not know about Whitney M. Young, that is a problem, right? So one, he has to do the work in that space of lifting up his heroes and sheroes. Two, I would challenge the systems to understand that there are people who look like us, who have been in leadership, who have paved the way, that your work is to make sure that they are represented. It is not our work as an employee to do that. So everyone has a role in trying to create a space of equity and create a space of respect, right? And understand that in a more intentional way as we do this work as social work. The last thing I wanted to just share with people, and I go back to Indigenous organizations, in 1990, I graduated in 1983. I had an opportunity to go to South Africa because of ASUBA. I was part of Albany State University Black Alliance that gave me the opportunity. And I just thought that there were so many things that helped me become who I am. But I was there in 1994 when Mandela became president, because I had the relationship with the Albany State University Black Alliance that were doing social action around apartheid. And again, I'm coming from the South, but when you talk about seeds that were planted for me to be where I am today, that really kind of culminated, and that was I would say the pivotal point as a young person to have that experience. But it was an Indigenous organization, again, that you have to attach yourself to. Whoever it is, Native American, Latino, American Africans, that those matter, that your history matters. So that's what I would offer in making sure that you become the best that you can be, is really tying yourself to your history.
Awesome. Thank you. And the Titan himself, Gregory Owens.
Thank you so much. I would say a few things. One is don't be afraid to unlearn what you learned and to relearn what you need to know. We do a session for young people called You've Been Tricked, young Black males. And we walk them through all the ways that they have been misled and miseducated, how their identities have been attacked by a narrative that says you can't be, you aren't, and it's your fault. So don't be afraid to unlearn and then relearn what you need to know. The second is to recenter your identity as Black men in this field of social work. Many times our identity as Black men in general is often moved away from the center, and we fall prey to a narrative that talks about all the things we aren't or can't do. Mm-hmm. And so I think what we need to do is recenter ourselves as being important in this work for many of the reasons we've talked about tonight, and because there's some young person waiting for us to do that. Right. There's a family waiting for us to do that. And so we have to recenter ourselves in that, because the institutions and the structures and the nature of white supremacy has moved us to the side. I think we have to recognize that what we have seen for many, many years has been social work, whether it's been the formal, educational, licensed degree. I think Brother Dr. Aplier said, the hall monitors were doing social work in school, right? The people in the community who were making sure that if you were in trouble, there was something for you, a place to go, food to eat. That's part of what we have lifted up as this legacy. It wasn't a group of white people, particularly women, who started this profession. And so when you look at this notion of social work, it's got to be much broader than sometimes what we are offered. There is an opportunity to engage in a liberatory practice and policy perspective here that can actually change people's lives. And so I agree, Greg, if we go into this trying to be superheroes, we're just in the wrong place. I do think we need to acknowledge that if we don't try to be the change makers that we were intended to be, then we'll fall prey to the patriarchy and the white supremacy that says, just walk the path of agency policy and keep your mouth shut.
Wow.
The last thing that I would offer to you is if you don't know about NASW, just like if you don't know what the real Black Panthers was about, you'll fall prey to what the media has told us about our organizations. And so find out about what happened in 1968. Find out what the organization has been able to do over the course of time. Find out why we said that, what we said about transracial adoption and what was really said about it. And then you'll be able to make a decision about these groups that Barry talks about in terms of finding your indigenous affinity groups that you need to be a part of. NASW helped me to understand identity as a Black male social worker. Without that, I think I would have floundered for a much longer time than I did.
Wow.
Those are some things that I speak to. And again, Pastor, this was genius. Thank you so much. It's been a phenomenal blessing. I'm going to tell Deacon Terry that she's right. You are the bomb.
Well, let me just first say thank you to all of you. Every single one of you, Greg, Deacon Owens, Barry Walston, all of you came and you provided exactly what was needed for this panel. When they asked me about doing when they asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, hey, I want to do this panel, the chapter got behind me 110%, and I could not have even imagined that it would have the impact that it had, not just for those who are on the Zoom, but for me, even as the moderator. And so thank you all. You have been absolutely phenomenal. I see folks dropping the information in the chat. I'm going to drop my email address. Feel free to reach out to me. I know that contact information will come out from the chapter at some point within the week. I'm also going to ask if Dr. Donna Pleers, my friend and brother, will drop my LinkedIn in the chat, because he's dropped everyone else's LinkedIn in the chat. So he needs to drop my LinkedIn in the chat. Thank you, Dr. Donna Pleers. And thank you all for taking the time to come tonight, to hang out with us as we share not only the struggles, but always remember to share the successes that we've had as Black male social workers. So again, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful night. And
thank you.
Maybe we'll come back with a part 2. We'll see. Take care.
Hey.